Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent says a good agreement on tariffs with Japan remains within reach following a meeting with Japanese Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba. Let's in fact listen in to what the Japanese Prime Minister had to say.
私から米国の関税措置について双方の利益となる合意をまとめるように赤澤大臣との間で精力的に協議を続けてほしいとこのように申し上げたところ。
While no specific terms, including the planned 25% US tariff on Japanese goods, were discussed, Japan's top envoy, Akazawa, is set to continue the talks. Akazawa confirmed both sides agreed to maintain constructive dialogue. The Treasury Secretary's visit comes amid political uncertainty in Japan as Ishiba's fragile minority government faces a key upper house vote this Sunday. Meanwhile, reports suggest Akazawa is preparing to visit Washington next week for further talks with Bessent and Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick. Bessent underscored that a good deal matters more than a rushed one, signalling a deliberate but hopeful path forward in US-Japan trade relations. We're now joined by Andrew Latham, who's a professor of international relations. He joins us from Minneapolis in the United States. Andrew, thank you very much for joining us on the programme. Professor Latham, what trade-offs might Japan accept here to avoid this imposed 25% US tariff, and where do you think it should draw the line?
Well, it's like every country, it has core industries that it will protect. It's the case in India, it's the case in Canada with the dairy industry. It's simply the case that for domestic political purposes, there's a bright red line around those sectors, and I think the automobile sector is probably that in the Japanese case. I think if we backed up just a little bit and we ask ourselves, what is President Trump up to here in his administration with these tariffs? And the tariffs have had three logics which are mutually incompatible. Sometimes they're talked about as a means of raising revenue. He's even talked about replacing the income tax, as was the case in the early 20th century. Sometimes it's about onshoring or reshoring production, about forcing countries to relocate their manufacturing facilities to the United States and to employ Americans, et cetera. Those two have begun to fade into the background, and increasingly what we see, whether it's with respect to Canada or India or the EU or the UK, these tariffs are being used as leverage in bilateral negotiations to strike the best possible deal. So the logic here is you threaten 25% in the Japanese case across the board, then you sit down, as the Secretary of the Treasury did and as the Secretary of Commerce will do in the near future, and you say, look, it's 25%, or you can make these changes and we'll drop it considerably. And most countries are taking that deal. Certainly the case, it looks like it's panning that way in India and Canada, and it has already happened with the UK. And I think that's what's going on here. And so we've got a minority government in Japan that doesn't have a lot of skating room, not a lot of wiggle room. It's going to be asked by the Trump administration to make some big concessions, and remains to be seen if the domestic politics are such that they are able to make those concessions and get some reciprocal concessions out of the U.S., especially dropping the 25% across the board tariff.
Andrew, we don't have much time left, but I just want to quickly ask you a quick question. Japan is a huge investor in the United States. If this deal isn't reached by August the 1st and this 25% tariff is imposed on Tokyo, what could be the ramifications for both the US consumer and the Japanese consumer?
Well, the U.S. consumer is going to start paying more money because that 25% will just be tacked on to the price of Japanese automobiles, for example. Japan has already had a few months of declining exports just on the prospect of a 25%, because the United States is a major trading partner of Japan, obviously. So it's a lose-lose, except that Donald Trump has a habit and a history of extending deadlines. So if he doesn't get what he wants by August 1st, he might put it off to September 1st or to October 1st. He has something of a habit of doing that. This is all about the art of the deal, however bad the deal is from Donald Trump's perspective. And I think it remains to be seen, because I think the domestic political situation in Japan is fraught with all kinds of potential problems. You know, this minority government might be defeated, and it just doesn't have a lot of wiggle room and negotiating room with respect to the U.S. My guess is that a deal will be done. My guess is that on a scale of 1 to 10, it will be a 7 or 8 for both countries. both the manufacturers in both countries and the consumers. And it will be back to, if not quite business as usual, something approximating business as usual.
Andrew Latham, thank you very much for joining us. Some great insight there. We now move over to Europe, where you